The headline says there was a deal between the United States and Iran that vanished before it truly began. The reality is far more unsettling than simple policy failure. You are watching this because you need to understand why a major power would destroy its own agreement without achieving any strategic gain. By the end of this explanation, you will see how that withdrawal functioned not as a mistake, but as a calculated bargaining chip designed to extract maximum leverage through chaos itself. To understand what happened in 2018, we must first discard the idea that international agreements are sacred documents meant for perpetual stability. In realpolitik, treaties often serve as temporary mechanisms rather than final destinations. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was originally signed by Iran and world powers to limit nuclear enrichment capabilities in exchange for sanctions relief. On paper, this reduced the time required for Tehran to produce enough fissile material for a single weapon from 1 year down to roughly 12 months. That metric became the baseline for all subsequent diplomatic maneuvering. When President Trump withdrew from that agreement, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo immediately announced a policy of maximum pressure intended to force Iran back into negotiations under far more favorable terms than those originally offered by the Obama administration. The logic seemed sound on the surface. By removing the sanctions relief and threatening total economic isolation, Washington hoped to create enough pain within the Iranian economy that their leadership would capitulate completely. The United States essentially treated the withdrawal as a high-stakes negotiation protocol where the credibility of the threat outweighed the utility of any existing agreement. This approach viewed the dismantling of the deal not as policy failure but as a deliberate commitment device intended to reset the bargaining range entirely. However, the data from the years following that decision tells a different story about how these leverage points actually function in practice. Despite the rhetoric of maximum pressure, the outcome was paradoxical and counterintuitive for anyone expecting diplomatic success through coercion alone. The withdrawal did not force Iran back to the negotiating table with concessions. Instead, it accelerated their nuclear progress significantly. Within 2 years of abandoning the agreement, the breakout timeline shrank from roughly 6 months rather than 1 year as originally stipulated in the deal. This rapid acceleration suggests that the mechanism designed to extract leverage actually destroyed the very constraints that made negotiation possible. Quick resource note: I keep a curated set of Amazon search links in the description for books, gear, and tools relevant to this channel's topics. Some are affiliate links, so I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Please consider supporting the channel by using those links if you find something useful. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak noted this distinction clearly when he argued that while he viewed the original agreement as flawed, the American exit was not the optimal method for achieving security goals. He pointed out that other signatories remained committed to the framework even after Washington left, and multinational corporations found ways to bypass restrictions anyway. This creates a critical complication in understanding the strategy. The deal functioned less as a final policy objective and more as a tool used to extract concessions before being discarded once the leverage curve peaked. The strategic value of the agreement was decoupled from its technical specifications regarding uranium enrichment limits. Instead, it was redefined as a temporary bargaining chip whose life cycle was dictated by utility rather than long-term viability. In asymmetric conflicts like this one, the destruction of an existing protocol can be required to force a state actor into a position where the cost of non-compliance exceeds the cost of future concessions. The administration utilized a fail-fast engineering approach where the system was stress-tested against a hostile node to validate the maximum leverage threshold before any potential renegotiation could occur. Here is the thing that most observers miss about this entire sequence of events. The withdrawal served as a negative feedback loop mechanism within the geopolitical system itself. By immediately destroying the existing protocol, Washington forced Iran into a position where they had no choice but to expand their program rapidly. This chaos was not an accidental byproduct. It was a tool for extraction intended to reset the relationship entirely. Yet this strategy contains a fatal flaw that undermines its effectiveness as a bargaining chip in any future scenario. The United States unilaterally dismantled the very mechanism that provided the leverage in the first place. Once the threat of withdrawal was played, Washington lost the ability to influence Iran's enrichment levels directly because they had removed their own enforcement role from the equation. The multinational partners remained committed while the U.S. walked away, effectively rendering the strategy a failure rather than a calculated trade-off. This reveals that the primary objective shifted from achieving a specific deal outcome to maintaining maximum pressure as the default operational mode regardless of cost. This pattern of deal then, no deal, creates a systemic architecture where uncertainty becomes the weaponized asset. The adversary remains in a perpetual state of ambiguity, which theoretically maximizes the value of any future concessions extracted because they never know when the next threat will materialize or if it is permanent. But this approach has diminishing returns. After 2 years of pressure and accelerated nuclear progress, the United States found itself with zero strategic gain while antagonizing its traditional allies who remained committed to the original framework. The critical knowledge gap that remains concerns whether a negotiated exit could have achieved better leverage than total withdrawal, or if the maximum pressure doctrine was inherently incompatible with diplomatic flexibility. The evidence suggests that once the chip is played and destroyed, the player loses their hand entirely. You cannot threaten to withdraw from an agreement you no longer possess while expecting to maintain influence over the terms of negotiation. This case illustrates a broader truth about how states behave when incentives shift toward short-term extraction over long-term stability. The credibility of threats often matters more than the utility of agreements, but only as long as there is still something left on the table that can be threatened or taken away. When you destroy the entire game board in an attempt to win a single hand, you have no leverage for the next round. The withdrawal was not a failure because it did not achieve its stated goals. It succeeded perfectly at what it actually set out to do: reset the bargaining range through chaos and force the adversary into a corner where they had no choice but to escalate their own capabilities in response. The result is that Iran now possesses more fissile material than before. Allies are frustrated by American unpredictability, and the window for any future diplomatic solution has narrowed significantly. This dynamic reveals why realpolitik often looks like failure from an idealist perspective when viewed through a moral lens. But when you examine the incentives and constraints driving state behavior, the logic becomes clear even if the outcome is strategically costly in the long run. The deal was never about stability. It was always about extracting value before discarding the instrument of extraction once its utility peaked. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I am a one-person team working hard to make each video better than the last. Subscribe if you found value. It is the best way to show support. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. See you in the next video.